Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka BlenderEd, Blender HD. If you want to follow me on Twitter, the co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you could pick up at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me bi-weekly, as usual, by Neil Orfield of Stochastic on the Contrary podcast, on the High Stakes podcast, all the NFL content over at Stochastic, and seems like you got a haircut or you trimmed up or whatever. You almost look a decade younger now.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. This is how short I usually shave my head, and that was my intention. I put on the blade, but I was going to do both. But I was going to do my head first, and then I forgot that I put on the guard for my head, and of course went right up the middle of my chin, and it was like, and not even centered, like it was kind of off center. It was just like, this is unsalvageable, immediate regret. But hopefully it'll grow back quickly.
What? I don't know. I guess you like facial hair. I'm the opposite. I don't want itchy stuff all over my face.
Yeah, it's I think I need some facial hair. It doesn't look good on the, when you've got a little weight on you, your cheeks are a little bit too puffy, and then the beard kind of elongates your face. It just makes you look better, I think.
Oh, so you care more about your appearance now that you're on camera more often.
Exactly. I mean, it's the only thing people see of me is my face.
And, right. You got to be sexy for the DFS audience.
Yeah, exactly. I know that's what they're there for.
Well, it's December now. We're getting into the dog days of the NFL season. I've been playing some World Cup stuff primarily, not really focused on NBA DFS. I've been all I see is tilt in NBA DFS like every single day. I'm almost happy to tilt the soccer games rather than the NBA stuff. I know NFL did not go well with me this past week when the two highest owned wide receivers crush.
Yeah,
and I purposely didn't play both of them in the same lineups together. I don't know what's been going on with you.
Yeah, I mean, NFL not going that great for me either. I thought Christian Watson was a terrible play. Like, I was just avoiding Christian Watson at all costs. I was like, he's going to get so much steam because he keeps scoring touchdowns. And then, of course, he scored two more touchdowns. Did you expect
him to be 17% owned in the millie?
It didn't surprise me. I just thought that there were enough box score chasers out. We didn't project him that high, but like I said on one of my shows, like I think that he's a guy who's going to get more ownership than we expect because of how much he's been scoring touchdowns. Every single touch he gets, he scores a touchdown. So I actually went high on Allen Lazard this week. He was one of my higher owned plays because I thought, well, everybody's going to go to, they're essentially the same play, except for one of them is going to be 17% owned. One of them is going to be, I didn't obviously predict exactly how much, but Watson ended up 17%, nearly 18%, and Allen Lazard was under 3%. And of course, through most of the first half, Allen Lazard was crushing him, was on pace for over 100 yards. And then, of course, Christian Watson scores a touchdown right at the end of the first half and then adds on a rushing touchdown in the second half. So didn't work out for me.
Right. I did the same thing with Nick Chubb. Like, I knew he was going to be much higher owned than his projected ownership. I adjusted it. I didn't expect him to be 25% owned. I had him at 18, which was still like 10 points higher than a lot of sites had his ownership. So, of course, I played for the dynamic that maybe Deshaun Watson shows out in his first game. And no, the Browns defense scored all the touchdowns, and the Browns offense looked awful. But I thought that was good leverage off of a chalky Nick Chubb, and I think you did similarly.
Yeah, I don't think that I played Deshaun Watson. Maybe I'm misremembering. I did not play that many lineups this weekend. Let me pull up lineup study.
No, I thought I see here on Results DB.
Did I play some Deshaun Watson?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it wasn't. I had thought about playing some Deshaun Watson, but I didn't play a ton, as I recall. He wasn't. I may have just gotten there just based on projection. Like that might have been just a lineup that got into my set. I didn't really go out of my way to get rid of guys who projected well enough. And Deshaun Watson was a player that I thought, as you said, it was in a good enough spot. I saw the same thing that you did, where maybe they're just going to let him ball out in his first game back. In this revenge spot. It wasn't my favorite spot of the week, but also wasn't one that I hated.
The thing that also surprised me a little bit was Samaje Perine not being as owned as I expected. I put him in at 32, projected owned. He came in at 20, and even in the power sweep stuff and the spy stuff, like he came in at like 28, 30%, and at 6,000 in that game environment. I mean, I played 18 lineups. I had him in 14 out of 18 lineups. Uh, I so I said to James on the pregame show yesterday that what do you think the reason is? Because we've seen multiple times this year we get some type of late news and people react to it way quicker than I've seen in years past. So, like with Tony Pollard, when Zeke was doubtful. I mean, and this is like in a late game. Like people even like had to go like, is it 100%? I don't know. Should I plan for Tony Pollard? And people just said, nope, I'm jamming him. And we saw that with 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago with Gus Edwards out. Kenyon Drake ends up being the chalkiest running back. Bombs. Michael Carter last week ends up being way chalkier. I mean, we had a lot of value running backs on that slate, so he ended up being 16%, but I mean, originally it was like 2%.
Yep.
Do you think that some amount of recency bias of, because I mean, it was very clear that Mixon wasn't going to clear the concussion protocol like the day of, like it wasn't going to happen. To me, it was weird. I expected Perine to come in as the highest owned player on the slate. I mean, he was the 5th highest owned player on the slate, but do you think people are just like, this late news stuff, got burned with Drake, got burned with Carter, ain't going to pull it off with Perine? But the difference is that like Perine's in a much, I mean, dude, if he's going to get 80% of the work and the Bengals offense catching balls out of the backfield against the Chiefs, like, why aren't I jamming this in? And I'm just surprised the field really didn't. I mean, the fact that Nick Chubb was more owned than him was, Aaron Jones was not even that much less owned than him, or Zonovan Knight was 15%. I don't know.
I mean,
but could you account for the why Perine wasn't as jammed? Another like ETR. I know Leone and Levitan talked about it, that it's possible because that some other sites projections, because the ones that I aggregate had Mixon out, so it's like the ones that I look at. Like I could see like if one site didn't have him, had Mixon in, and you used their projections, it didn't look. You could say, okay, I don't get any Perine or anything like that. I get that.
I mean, I think it could be just the timing of it too. So I think you're right to like the recency bias, I'm sure, played some role in it. People have, I pivoted to this guy and then it failed, and people are emotional about their DFS. So if they get burned by a move that they made, pivoting off somebody and playing, the new guy, and it doesn't go well, then they think, oh, this is then I shouldn't do that anymore because it burned me last time. Certainly, I think that probably plays a role. But then also, like, as of Saturday, I believe Stochastic still had Joe Mixon. I think on the Saturday strategy show, I thought that Joe Mixon was still playing as of like noon Central Time on Saturday. So I think the news came out a little bit later on Saturday, maybe not even until Sunday morning, that he had not cleared concussion protocol and was now not going to be playing. So probably, people throughout the week hadn't been talking about it, because I think Joe Mixon had practiced in full like on Friday. It was my understanding that he was going to play going into Saturday. I had assumed he was, and then of course didn't pass concussion protocol. So probably a lot of people who were doing content were assuming that Joe Mixon was in, weren't talking about Samaje Perine all week. And then of course, there was, as you said, Zonovan Knight maybe played a little bit of a role. Nick Chubb, people thought they were just going to run the ball all over the Texans.
But wasn't that the same scenario with like the Gus Edwards and the James Robinson stuff? Like no one was talking about Michael Carter. No one was talking about Kenyon Drake. It seemed like this. Or do you think that people were building like projections didn't have Perine in and Mixon out pretty much till Sunday morning, right?
Exactly.
That's so like if you were making lineups the night before and then just like didn't care to update them, like you weren't making Perine lineups. I'm just trying to figure out what situation affected this week, while like this thing with Carter and Drake it's the same. Like, dude, Gus Edwards that day was not not out until the morning. So like
Yeah.
so I I mean I'm glad that I played 14 out of 18 lineups with Pirine at that ownership. Uh, I mean I also barely played him Amon-Ra St. Brown as a one off. And that didn't work out well. Or I played
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson in half my lineups, but I also had Dalvin Cook or Justin Jefferson or a Mike White stack, or I played Wilson in a more correlated way. I try to see these trends on how the field reacts to news like this,
Yeah. I think
and
that there's also
I don't
the
understand why
intangible.
this situation was so much because dude P Ryan isn't like this compared to Kenyon Drake and Michael Carter. Like this is more similar to the Pollard incident
Right.
from
But
earlier in the season than
so
anything else.
I think I think there might be the name factor that Samaje Perine has always been like, third down back. He's never really been the lead back. So maybe people are just a little bit hesitant about, well, is he going to be the lead back? Is he really going to get the volume? We've seen it with, Kenyon Drake has gotten the volume before. Michael Carter has gotten the full workhorse back volume before. Mixon doesn't have a long track record of, playing as the workhorse back. I think he has done it
Yeah, but
before,
didn't
but
P Ryan do that literally the week before?
did Perine play the week
Yeah,
before? Was he
the
the bell
last
cow? Okay.
right.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah, so maybe I don't know. It is hard to account for that he was only 20%. That's definitely lower than I would have expected given the news breaking. But I mean, Stochastic had him projected for 23.5% ownership, so he came in under what we had him projected for, but not by a ton. But yeah, I can't think of any real logical reason for P Ryan being that low owned, except for I guess maybe Joe Mixon had not actually been ruled out prior to the noon lock, so maybe people had kind of locked in some of their running backs.
Yeah, but wouldn't projections already account for that? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to what made this thing different than other things, and I can't see a reason other than it's just I don't know, just an aberration.
Well, how much did Michael Carter get the week before? Because I'll say this: I was going to play Michael Carter even before the news came out. I was going to play. Yes, I was going to play Michael Carter the previous week,
Mm,
even before we got the news that James Robinson was not active. So I think that part of it might be that Michael Carter was already a good play, and I wasn't the only one. I think there were other people who were already on Carter before James Robinson was made inactive, and he was. I mean, he was the lead back, I think, before James Robinson became inactive. So this is a different situation where if you were expecting Joe Mixon to play, Samaje Perine wasn't. He wasn't even in play with Joe Mixon active, so it was a little bit different in that. Pirine went from not in play to being a great play, whereas like Michael Carter went from already a really good play to a great play with James Robinson being inactive.
I still don't get what makes this. We're getting up to Hanukkah, right? What makes this night different than all other nights? I don't know. I'm not complaining about it. It just
Right.
one of my strengths is figuring out how the field's going to react. And I mean the two biggest misses that I had. I mean, yeah, I have to consider P Ryan a miss when I have him at 32 and he comes in at 20. And when I have Christian Watson at 6 and he comes in at 17, I wasn't even playing him at 6% ownership, let alone 17. So when the cards flip over, I'm like, great, great. 70% of the field is playing Christian Watson. And then, of course, he curb stomps me
Yeah.
by doing so. And then you can't win a GPP without the Browns defense. So,
Yeah.
there goes that. But I mean, we got like extended ownership on like Nico Collins, on Sky Moore, 9% Sky Moore. I had Sky Moore I think in one lineup, but it was the Mahomes lineup. Like I was like Mahomes, Sky Moore, Travis Kelsey. I know I'm saying this looking at you played Sky Moore in like half your lineups.
Yeah, I really liked Sky Moore. I also thought he was going to be lower than 9% when I saw that ownership. I was kind of bummed because I thought I was going to get him at like 3% ownership, and he was 3,100. And I think it may be a bias that I have for Sky Moore because I already have him in so many of my best ball lineups. So maybe I should have just hedged and not played him. But I was like, man, he's coming on. He's finally getting a decent amount of the snap share. Patrick Mahomes has been targeting him downfield. I think one of these weeks he's going to break out, and I thought this was as good a spot as any for Sky Moore to break out with Mecole Hardman out, and just did not work out. Yeah, didn't. And Justin Watson, I had a lot of Sky Moore and a lot of Justin Watson, and both of them just were not good. They just these Kansas City receivers. I've been biting it all year. I've been playing these Kansas City receivers because I'm like, they put up so many points every week. They score so many fantasy points, and it just seems like somehow nobody ever gets it done other than Travis Kelce. I don't understand it how that is the case, but that seems to be the case week after week. Just nobody of these receivers gets it done any given week. And maybe I should jump off the train. I'm dug in at this point. I'm like, one of these guys is going to have a breakout week one of these weeks, and they're priced at 3,100, 3,200. So of course, this is a week I think I maybe even gave the example on one of my shows. Would you rather play Sky Moore or no? I don't think I did give the example, because the example I thought about giving was Trent Sherfield in the Miami offense. And then I thought, no, that's actually also a really good offense. So not the best example, but oftentimes you're choosing between these, a 3,200 Justin Watson or a 3,100 Sky Moore in a great Kansas City offense in a great game environment. I would rather play those guys at that price rather than, a Nico Collins or some of these wide receivers who are on not such great offenses and not as great of spots. So
rather than like Chris Moore or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Chris Moore was the example that was coming up a lot. And I reduced his projection because I was like, I don't want to play Chris Moore. I'd rather play these Kansas City receivers who are clearly in a better spot. And then of course did not work out. But that was the thought process for me.
Right. I didn't mind playing them in a correlated way. So like if I was gonna play like a Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, Harrison Bryant, Chris Moore, fine.
Yeah, right.
Same thing for Sky Moore. Sky Moore popped a little because he was 3,100 and he projected for like 8.5 or something. But it's like I don't want to play him as a one-off. It's like I'll play him in Mahomes or Burrow lineups, primarily Mahomes' lineups. Like that's fine. Like to me, those are the types of plays that are built more for correlation than as just like, oh, can he get me? If that guy has 26 points as a one-off, like probably Mahomes has 35 plus.
Yeah, because the game is gone PPR.
Off. Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Talking about DFS ownership projections, I wanted to bring up a tweet from Dean. I think we call him Dean on the show. I think that's his middle name that we use because he doesn't want his he's been on the show. It's the sports_projections guy.
Yep.
Right. Who must find it to be sucky now that the MMA late swap and
that's shitty for him.
Like using his tools over there isn't as useful because you don't get all the lineups anymore right in the beginning. And he brings up a point that I brought up in relation before in the pregame show about as far as like the ownership projection accuracy, like what's more important. And I agree macro wise with what he has said. I don't know if you've seen this tweet thread.
No, I have not.
Just as a background, a lot of sites and a lot of people that do ownership projections measure their accuracy as an R squared, right? So they have all of their ownership projections and then all of their actuals, and then compare that on a line and have R squared 0.87, 0.93. It's a correlation coefficient.
Yep.
Okay. The thing is that I don't think that measuring your ownership projection accuracy based on all of the ownership on all the players that you've projected ownership for, and then looking at the correlation, it does it justice, because the accuracy of your ownership projections differs from player to player, from ownership to ownership. So like this is what he said. Thread on DFS ownership projections. What should you try to optimize when building a model for ownership projections in DFS? Most people use R squared or correlation measures, but I don't think that's what most ownership models should solely by optimizing. Okay, as an example of the problem with R squared, here are two sample ownership projections compared with actuals with about the same exact R squared of 0.97 or so. And it basically says, here's one set, projected 1, actual 6. Projected 5, actual 10. Projected 25, actual 30. Projected 43, actual 40. Projected 45, actual 50. And then here's the second set. Projected 1, actual 2. Projected 5, actual 6. Projected 25, actual 30. Projected 47, actual 40. Projected 58, actual 50. Both of these are squared, or 0.974 and 0.972. And then he says, in my opinion, which I agree with, getting ownership correct on low-owned players is more important given how sensitive strategy is to small changes. A player projected at 5% ownership coming in at 10% means they're in double the amount of lineups as expected. Missing from 50% to 55% is only a miss of 10%. Therefore, any model builders would probably be better suited to segment by actual ownership or other statistical techniques to evaluate the model. Additionally, for anyone who adjusts ownership projections, think there is more opportunity focused on the lower owned players. And this is very similar to what I've said, is that I've said it in a different way, is that it's more important to get the higher owned players right. But it does, what I mean by right is not accurate. It just means directionally correct. But it's more important to get the lower owned players accurate. Like, I'd much more, and it shows exactly what it has on the chart of like these two sets of ownership. Okay, if a guy you project to be 25% owned ends up being 30, like, I don't mind, but if I project him for 25 and he ends up being 48,
right,
to me that's the most important. Or if I project him for 25 and he ends up being 5, that's the most important at that point. I need to make sure that the highest owned players are the ones that are actually going to be the highest owned. Right? If you're off on that, like if you had Nick Chubb at 6% projected ownership and he came in at 25 as one of the highest owned running backs, that's much worse than even a 1% player being 6% though. Like if you miss on those miss totally on the chalk, like everything else is going to be off. There's no way for you to be anywhere close to reasonable in building lineups. But what ends up happening is when you do the R squared of everyone in the player pool, like your ownership projection is going to look very accurate because half the players are less than 1% owned anyway, right? So getting a play like I'm going to project this guy for 1.2% ownership, and he ends up being 0.65. How many lineups does that represent? Not that much, right?
What is the incentive for these people who are publishing their data to be more accurate but look worse? Like, isn't it just going to make them look worse if you do it from an individual level where you're not just compiling everybody? Like,
no, but that's the easiest way to compare. That's the linear way of doing it. I'm going to take all of the ownership. There's 500 players in the player pool. I'm going to project ownership for all 500, and then every plot point is 1/500th of everything that you do. So it's 200 of the players you're projecting for 1% or less ownership, and they pretty much come in at 1% less ownership. So it's look how accurate it is.
Oh, exactly. It's not as informative, but it looks better. So like
right. But that's what I'm saying. It looks better. Yeah. So the point being is that if you're gonna have accuracy of ownership projections, I agree with them. It has to be segmented in some way. Like I take a look at what we mentioned with the misses, like Samaje Perine being 20% when I projected him for 32 is not that I'm off by 12 percentage points. I'm off by almost 50%. But Samaje Perine I had as the highest owned player on the slate, and he came in at the 5th highest ownership, and still one of the highest owned players on the slate. So to me, that isn't as important from a strategic standpoint because, yes, he's in less lineups than I expect, but he's still in a lot of lineups. Christian Watson, having him at 6% and him coming in at 17 is a humongous miss. Now, I had him over-owned at 6%, so it didn't fucking matter to me, right? So I would have had him way over-owned at 17%. But imagine playing Christian Watson thinking you're playing a low-owned 6% owned player. Imagine playing Nick Chubb thinking he's going to be 8% owned and he comes in at 25. Like, those are, if you have one of those misses in your 500 players that you're comparing, like, that's worth like all of the 200 players that are one per, like that.
Yeah.
That's such a massive miss that you have to account. That has to be weighed more than the shit-owned players. And then also, even with the shit-owned players, like, like you said, with Sky Moore, there's a big difference between Sky Moore at 3% and Sky Moore at 9%.
Yeah.
Right? That's only 6 percentage points, but, like, the difference between Samaje Perine at 20 versus 32 isn't nearly as big as the Sky Moore one. It's not nearly as big as, like, I take a look at some of the ownership from this past slate, and I go, like, I'm looking down to see if there's any others that, like, I had Kenny Walker at like 14%. He came in at 8.5. Like, to me, that's more of a miss than Samaje Perine. That I had Garrett Wilson at 26, and he came in at 34. That isn't it. The discrepancy actually is wider, but an 8% owned player coming in at 16% owned, like, it's double the amount of lineups. Like, while the difference between a 20% owned player coming in at 26 is, like, there's still a lot of lineups, and now they're getting a lot more lineups. So, like, getting the players that I consider not necessarily the 1% owned players, because a lot of times I'm not even playing the 1% owned players. It's more of those, like, 3 to 6%, like, that range is the most important to get correctly, because the difference between the Sky Moore example is exactly, if I told you Sky Moore was 3%, you're like, you play him at 9%, and you go, I want to avoid him like the plague.
Yeah.
Because even though, like, if I told you he was 6%, you'd be like, okay, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
But these things are very sensitive in that range. But if I told you Austin Eckler, like, he came in at 17. If I told you, if I projected him at 20, right? Or you projected him at 15 or 14, does him coming at 17 really change anything? Like,
for me.
Right. If you projected him for 10% ownership and he came in at 17, that's a little bit of a discrepancy, but not as big as 3 to 9, not as big as 5 to 10. Like, especially on that single digit range, that matters a lot more. But you also still need to get the chalk right. If you had Garrett Wilson at 14% owned and he came in at 34, like, you're dead. Your ownership projections are your lineups are going to be. You're probably have Garrett Wilson in so many lineups at that point.
Right.
And once you see him at 34%, it's like, well, he completely destroys the leverage in every lineup that you build him in.
Yep.
Right. So you have to get the chalk right first. And then secondly, you should be concerning yourself more with, are there any 2 or 3% owned players that project well, that end up in your lineups? Because, like I said, I do this manually. And when people ask me, it's like, why can't you, like, publish your ownership projections? And number one, they're not scientific. I do them like an hour before the lock, because that's when I'm building my lineups. And I'm not doing them for all the players. I'm only doing it for the players that will make my lineups, or that have any sense. And, like, I'm not projecting. I'm not changing the ownership on I don't even know, the Ben Skowronek on a slate where no one's playing the Rams. It's like,
What's
like, if he comes in at 2 and not 1, and what, I don't
want him either way.
I don't want him either way, and he's not even making I could run 300 lineups in Lineup HQ and not get any. So it's basically, if I run 300 lineups in Lineup HQ with aggregated projections, anyone that comes up at all, like, literally, if they come up in one lineup, I need to figure out what their ownership is gonna be. Right? And then outside of that, I can eliminate like 80% of the player pool from even adjusting their ownership. Like, I just don't, I'm probably not playing them. It probably doesn't matter to me. Right? Unless there's some talk up, like I had to manually up AJ Brown, because projection wise, he wasn't really showing up, but I knew that the narrative or whatever, but, like, it just means I went from not playing him to definitely not playing him. But I need to account for that ownership somewhere. So it's like I bump up A.J. Brown to 10%, and then I look in that range at wide receiver and go, okay, maybe Justin Jefferson comes down a little. Maybe T. Higgins comes down a little. Maybe, something like that happens in that range. But to me, it's more important, get the chalk right, then focus on the single-digit players that you're either project well and you're like, they're underowned, make sure they are underowned. And then the ones that don't project well, that look like low-owned, that they're low-owned, maybe they're higher-owned. Or higher-owned, like figuring out what Nico Collins' ownership was going to be tough. Because I knew people weren't necessarily playing Texan stacks, and I knew that people were going to play some Dameon Pierce, but probably not with Nico Collins lineups. So I'm looking in this 4K range of like wide receiver and go, how many more people are going to play Zay Jones? How many more people are going to play Traylon Burks? Then we obviously, then the really cheap guys like DeAndre Carter, Sky Moore, stuff like that. And then it's like, what is Nico Collins? I put Nico Collins at 10%, right? He came in at 13. But if your site or your owner's projections had him at 6, you'd think he's a great play, right? But I mean, and if you had him at 18, you'd be like overowned, right?
So what is the solution? So I'm with you. I'm following everything you're saying. What do you think the solution is? Just segment like by buckets. I think that's what Dean said. Is we got to look at the actual ownership as a starting place, and then make buckets based on what the actual ownership came in at. Is that do you agree with that being the correct approach for? And this would be for people who are like, if you are aggregating projections, maybe you want to do this to figure out, well, which ownership projections are the most accurate. Not necessarily for the companies themselves who are publishing how accurate their ownership projections are. This isn't the way that they're going to want to do it for people, but for if you are back testing the accuracy of ownership projections, that's when you want to do this.
No, yeah, I would want a bucket of like how accurate was the ownership of project. I mean, if you want to do really, really blunt, like 20 plus percenters, 10 plus percenters, 5 plus percenters, and 1 plus percenters.
Yep.
And then then combine them together. Like, don't wait so many 1% owned players as part of your player pool. And then on the upper end of the spectrum, like the percentage off matters more than the number. Because I've seen like charts that people publish afterwards of like, we were +7 on this guy and -4 on that guy. It's like, well, -4 on a guy that was only projected 4% owned is 100% miss.
Yep.
Is 100% miss. +7 on a guy that you had at 27 and came in at 34 is what? What's that? 27 divided by 30. I mean, you're talking about what, a 21% miss, like there. So like those shouldn't be equal to one another,
right? So
some way to adjust for that, and then have an R squared value. But even then, I wouldn't even care about what the overall R squared of. I'm just
right.
Give me the buckets.
You care about individual players,
right? Yeah. And also, if you're using multiple ownership projection sources, I wouldn't mind mixing them together. There may be certain sites that are much better at projecting chalk, accurate, like even though I'd rather have one site that knows that instead of 27% Garrett Wilson, it's 34% Garrett Wilson, and then maybe they're not as good as the single-digit owned plays, but maybe another site, maybe they may balance out the chalk more. Right. So it equals the same amount of ownership, just in between Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Christian Kirk. Like they get the total right, but they have it all balanced. Right. So it's like it's 25, 25, 25 instead of like 18, 28, 34.
Right.
But on the single digit owned guys, like the 2%ers end up being 2% and the 5%ers being 5%. While another site may have one guy for 10% and another guy for 1%, and it ends up being both in the middle. Like, so then I could kind of mix and match. And obviously I would have to do something in Excel in order to Like, only choose these players and aggregate them together like that. I mean, I personally, I wouldn't do that anyway, because I think my feel approach, I start with the aggregate, and then I just adjust from that. Like, it doesn't matter to me what the R squared is from anywhere. I'm changing everything anyway. But I just think in general, the misnomer that we should be judging ownership projections by just a straight R squared of everything, like, really, it doesn't do a DFS player any good from a strategic standpoint,
Right.
whatsoever, because of how I just explained it.
Yeah. It's a good thing for the company publishing it, because it looks good when you just do an R squared of the entire pool. But yeah, it's not really helpful to DFS players. I agree.
And this is also especially telling in MMA.
Sure.
MMA, number one, the player pool size isn't as big. But let me tell you that the ownership projections around the industry for MMA are pretty poor.
Yeah.
The weird thing is that as an aggregate, much more accurate.
Interesting.
Like, I haven't done it recently, okay, but when over this past summer, I measured the ownership from everywhere that at least publishes MMA ownership projections. The most accurate is the aggregate out of all of them, but no single one was that accurate. I mean, like and you could see, if you go from site to site in MMA, that there can sometimes be dramatic. Like, I could even take a look. Let me take a look. I'm doing this on the fly of the last slate.
I'm curious how late swap has it. So I didn't even play MMA this weekend. So it would have been 3 slates or so with the late swap in MMA, maybe just 2. And okay. Well, I didn't play this last one. I'd be curious to see how much more wrong they are now that there is late swap, because it seems like it's almost impossible prior to the slate to really predict ownership, assuming that people
it depends on the slate. Obviously, the first slate with the main event getting canceled, that you have to throw everything out. Right. That I disregard. I don't even include those. Those don't even count.
Right.
But like in the last slate we had with the Holland Thompson slate, and I backed into I lost money, but I backed it. Like, dude, late swap. I agree. There are some people you've seen on Twitter, and I think Alex agrees. In the large field, and we talked about this previously, in the large field contests, I don't think late swap is, if you're just going to play large field contests and you're like, I'm never going to late swap, I don't think you're giving up that much edge, because the optimal wins so much more frequently in MMA for the large field stuff, that no matter what your late swap strategy is, you're going to still need to find the optimal. Right. In the small field, much different story. So in the small field stuff, I backed into cashing more lineups than I should have.
Nice.
Because I went to the low variance fighters that ended up hitting their ceilings. So like,
so far it's working out really well for you, because in the first one you backed into $30,000.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but this one, basically my strategy is that, like, the Pavlovich Tuivasa fight. I know you didn't play the slate. It was a heavyweight fight, most likely going to end in the first round. High variance. Tuivasa was 7,200. Obviously, high. If he gets knocked, I mean, he did. He scored less than a point because he got his ass kicked in like 40 seconds. My Tuivasa lineups, once I got a loss, because I played a lot of the underdog in the second and third fights, Valdez and Rojo.
Mm-hmm.
So they both lost. So once one of them lost, I'm not playing that. I'm not playing the win. I'm not going to win. So now I just want 5 winners. I just want a high enough score to min cash. So I just switched my Tuivasa lineups to Eric Anders, who was facing Dawkins, and that fight was more likely to go the distance. And Anders ended up knocking him out in the second round and scoring 111 points.
Nice.
So that helps. And then I also switched to Angela Hill, 7,900 in the mid-range women's fight. And if you know Hill fights, they're typically striking affairs and they go to decision. She typically doesn't have a ceiling, but she just dominated on the feet for like all 3 rounds and scored like 104 points just on significant strikes. Nice. But it's like, all I'm doing is like, okay, I already have a loss in here. Now I need to switch my high variance fighters to low variance fighters and back into 4 or 5 wins. And I did. I ended up getting rid of the high variance losers in my lineups, other than the ones that I already had. So I knew I had no shot at first. But swapping out, when I see Tuivasa's ownership at 32% in the small field stuff, I'm like, I already got Anders. I already got Hill. So it's like Pavlovich puts up 144 points against Tuivasa. I don't have him, but it doesn't matter to me. You know why? Because I already have 1 or 2 losses in my lineup. It doesn't.
Right.
Like, I'm not playing for the optimal. So it's like I had 8 lineups. I cashed 4 of them. If I didn't late swap, I would have cashed 1 of them. Right? Because I would have had these Tuivasa lineups. High variance. Yeah, sure. If he puts up 120 points, I cash also. But me having Anders and Hill allowed me to get the same score as if Tuivasa knocked him out. I still get the same amount of money. You know why? Because I can't win first place. I can't win top 10.
Right.
So it wouldn't have been what happens if Tuivasa would have knocked him out? I said I would have 1.5x with that lineup as much as if Anders or it didn't matter. So these people that are like, I'm not sure late swap matters. It's like late swap definitely matters, and it matters way more in the small field. And a lot of times it's just basically rescuing lineups. Not even competing for first place. Just
it seems harder to do if you're playing 150. So
absolutely. Jesus, I wouldn't even consider that.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I think there are ways to do it with at least in Fantasy Cruncher. I assume other optimizers may be the same way. Where like if you could make groups after the first fight. Say if you have this fighter in a lineup, don't play this fighter. You can do that kind of thing maybe to force in some of those fighters. But yeah, certainly. But
the point is that it's not as the effect on your EV, the effect on your ROI is going to be much more minimal in large field because saving lineups, rescuing lineups isn't as important because so much equity is in first. Like if you're playing 150 lineups in the large field contest, you're not profitable unless you win.
Right.
I mean, I'm talking about long run. If you played that every slate for 40 slates in a year, you can't be profitable unless you win at least once.
Yep.
Right? First, not second, first.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not even solo. Maybe it's a 3-way dupe or a 4-way dupe. Or you have to do that. So like, how much is rescuing lineups to the cash line when you have 150 set in a large field going to have an effect on your ROI versus just simply finding the optimal?
Right.
Finding the optimal is 98% of the battle. But in the small field stuff, the 555 with 300 entries, you don't need to find the optimal. And rescuing a $555 entry to $1,000,
right? It's a lot more important than rescuing for $20 or whatever.
Right? Like how many? I mean, you're talking about that's like rescuing 25 lineups out of your 150 set at once.
Right. Yep.
Right. So like, you're probably not even going to be able to rescue that many lineups in your large field stuff anyway, as it is. But what I'm doing, I'm playing 8 lineups. Like, I can really focus on those 8 lineups and go, okay, switch here, switch there, switch that. Right, I got a loss here. Let me switch this up to Hill. Let me get a main event fight. Like, I went from all 8 lineups not having a main event fighter to 7 of 8 having a main event fighter because I'm sitting there with either 1 or 2 losses in all of my lineups after the 3rd fight. So I'm like, how do I get to the cash line? Okay, let me take a 5-round fight that's most likely going to go to the distance. Give it to me, 8,500, 7,700. Throw it in there. I get Angela Hill, Eric Anders. Just whatever I do, throw. And then can I get up to Dos Anjos, the biggest favorite on the slate? Good, lock in 100 points there. Give me that. And like Nicolau, who's under-owned, most likely go to distance strike. Okay, give me that. That's 90 points. Give me that there. So like a lot of lineups, the 8 lineups that I had looked almost nothing like they originally did. I had plenty. I had Pavlovich and Tuivasa in like half my lineups, and then I ended up with like him and like Pavlovich in one and Tuivasa in another, and that's about it, right? And just switching out. But going back to the ownership stuff, like in this past MMA slate, just to show you the disparity. I don't have the actuals. I didn't put in the actuals. So this is what I mean by the disparity of ownership. So we have like Jonathan Pierce, for instance. I'm not going to mention the site names.
Okay.
One site had him at 44% projected owned. One site had him at 28. Like that's a big discrepancy.
Yeah.
There's Matthias Nicolau. One site had him at 25. One site had him at 12.
Wow. Okay.
That's a big discrepancy. Jaregui. One site had him at 22. The lowest site had him at 11. Had her at 11. Right? Mark Giacchese. Highest 30. Lowest 15.
Wow.
Pavlovich. Highest 41. Lowest 28. Hermanson. Highest 25, lowest 12. I mean, like some of these are like 2x. Holtzman. One had him at 27 and one had him at 9.
Wow.
Right?
That's
but now once you average it all out, the average has the highest R squared compared to every single thing. The only single ownership projection that when I tested over the summer over all the slates, and I removed the slates that had I removed the Romanov slate, I removed the Lausanne, the ones with the scratches, because then you don't have accurate on that. I don't even want to count
Doesn't
those.
Matter. Yep.
Some sites had much lower R squared than other sites, but in comparison to the aggregate was leaps and bounds. Like the aggregate was like 0.88. And the highest R squared for all the other ones were like 0.74.
Wow.
Right? For like 0.62, like one was 0.62. It was awful. The only thing that beat the aggregate was my ownership.
Nice.
But of course, my ownership is the aggregate, and then a massage.
Yeah.
Right. So like here's for instance, Matthias Nicolau came in at 14. I believe he was 14% in the large field at least. This was the sites. This is what they projected: 22, 24, 25, 18, 12. So the one that had him at 12 was the most accurate.
Yeah.
But that site also had, like, I'm taking a look down. No, they got pretty much a lot of people correct. Had Darren Elkins at 22%, and Elkins was nowhere near 22% though. Right? Like they're all like, it's not like, oh, well, they're good on that one, but they're awful on another one. So like that's why the R squared ends up working out that like these ownership projections are off. But in this specific scenario, I had Matthias Nicolau at 14%. Like my ownership was 14, and Uruguay I had at 14 also. Like these were the 2.9, basically the 2.9K fighters that were going to be as owned, right? Then one site had Giacchese at 9,200 at 15, and I had him at 24, and I think he came in at like 22. It's somewhere in that range. But one site I'm at a third, like three sites had him at 27, 27, and 30. And two others had him at 15 and 19. Knowing his box score against Michael Johnson, who typically is not very good on the ground, and Giacchese putting up tons of takedowns in the past two fights, I knew he was going to be more owned than what algorithmically is projected. So it's like you need to get these things right. I mean, like in MMA, like you need to get these types of things right. Like, dude, Brian Barberena, the biggest underdog on the slate, like him being like if I put him at 6% and he ends up at 8%, don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Right? Like that to me, that does. Matt Schnell, I put him at 8 and he comes in at 7. Like if he came in at 11, who cares? Like whatever. But
right.
like, I mean, some of these guys, I mean, people get surprised at these ownership that the ownership comes out and go, wow, he's way more owned than what I expected. It's like, why wouldn't you have expected that? Said, well, all the ownership projections said this. Said, yeah, but all the content said X.
Right, and that's where you excel, is consuming all the content for all the sites. Where most of us don't do that. Most of us are consuming some content. I think there are plenty of players out there who don't consume any content. They just look at tools and stuff, which generally can be fine. But yeah, definitely.
But imagine playing Yasmin Uraigui, who you needed for the optimal line. She was in the first fight.
Mm-hmm.
One site projected her at 22% owned. And if you thought that she was going to be 22% owned at 9,300 with the Pierce and Dos Anjos on the slate and Pavlovich at 9,000, you would have said, I'm barely going to play her. It's like, how much upside does she, plus 225 inside the distance compared to some of these other lines? Mm-hmm. Why am I playing her at 22% ownership? I had her at 14. I had her under owned at 14, right? She probably efficient owned is like 16 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
But like that disparity matters. So imagine you're just using one source and going, well, 22% is over owned, and then the cards flip over and she's 12% owned, and you're like,
right.
Uh-oh, right? Yeah. Nicolau, people 20%, like, dude, literally everything about Nicolau it's a flyweight. The amount of knockouts that you get at flyweight is very minimal. Now, he did get a knockout because Matt Schnell has absolutely no chin. But if you listen to content, and I mean, if you just watch the tape, it's like, in comparison to all these other wrestlers, all these other fighters in the 9K range, it's like, yeah, Nicolau's gonna beat him up on the feet. Most likely, it may go the distance. Nicolau is very patient. He doesn't wrestle that often. How much upside does Matthias Nicolau have? And you have to pay 9,400 for him? What's his shot at 100 plus points? Yeah, he's plus 115 inside the distance, but you got wrestlers in this range. So it's like, looking through all that, it's like, yeah, you're right. At 9,400, it's going to be tough to pay off that price tag. I'll play him at low ownership, but not at high ownership. But imagine looking at sites and seeing 22, 24, 25. Like, if I saw that, I'd be like, I'm Xing him out.
Yeah.
Right? But to another site has him at 12. And I'm like, that's more the own. How could you put this person at 25% ownership after everything that, based on the context of this MMA slate, you're putting him in the same, like, dude, 100 more, you get Jonathan Pierce and 1 million takedowns. You get Dos Anjos for 200 more with 1 million takedowns. You get Jacasey for 200 less. You get Pavlovich for a quick win bonus, 400 less. How are you projecting him at 25% owned? And then, now, if you take a look down the entire length of the ownership projections, there will be other fighters where they're the ones that have the more, like they get the underdog correct. Like, dude, there was one site that had tied Tuivasa at 13% owned.
Mm-hmm.
He came in at 30, 32.
Okay. Yeah. Like, I don't know the context here. I didn't play this slate, so I'm okay.
Right.
32%. That's a big disparity there.
And for those that play MMA, now that I'm mentioning the numbers, if you play MMA and you subscribe to all these sites, you'll know what sites I'm talking about. So I'm not calling any sites out or anything. But the sites, the weird thing is that all of them are off, but all of them are also good depending on the fighters.
Right.
Like, it's like they're off, but not in the same direction. It's not the type of thing. Like, this would be so much different if it's like, oh, everyone across the board had Yasmin Uraigui at somewhere between 19 and 26%, and she came in at 12.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It'd be like, number one, I would have predicted she comes in at 12 to 14 anyway, but at least it's like everyone was wrong in the same direction, directionally.
Right.
And you look across the board, and you rarely see that. You see most of the time that some favorite is overprojected and some underdog is underprojected, and vice versa, and that will depend from site to site. So while Tai Tuivasa is projected at 13% when he comes in at 32. Like the same site has Natan Levy at 36, and he came in at like 32, and that was the more accurate one compared to other sites that had him at like 26.
So what I'm hearing is you need to subscribe to every site so that you can get accurate ownership projections, and then also listen to every piece of content so that you can hear, well, this is what is going to sway from what the sites are saying. Is that what you're saying? Basically, subscribe to every site.
But there really isn't that much MMA content.
There is not that much MMA. I feel like there have been weeks where I probably did consume like every piece of MMA content out there. So that is true.
What's the deal? What's the deal now with Jason and Pete? Like, well, now they do the before lock thing, but now their normal MMA show is on their own channel.
Yeah, seems like they're breaking off on their own a little bit. I think it's a business decision. I'm not kept in the loop on all of those kinds of things, but from what I've seen on Twitter, it appears that they're breaking off, kind of doing some of their own stuff, trying to maybe branch out a little bit, but not really sure.
Okay, I mean that's that. But to me, the MMA content that I listen to / read is their show.
Yep.
So it's whatever they do on Thursdays. Now they're doing it on the Fight IQ channel on their YouTube channel. The Dogger Pass podcast.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Pat Mayo Media Network. Pat Mayo.
Okay.
Yep. Brett Appley, Daily Fan MMA. He does a premium podcast behind the paywall. And he also does, obviously like the quick pick thing on the Mayo, whatever the hell.
I know Shrek loves him. I have not actually consumed that one. I don't subscribe, but
right.
I know Shrek has had success with him.
Then
I listen to John Kelly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. John Kelly. I read his stuff. I also the Occupy Fantasy.
Yep, I listen to that one too.
Right, and also
like 20-minute show. And
Jake does the MMA DFS.com. He has a whole write-up sheet for that. The RotoWire, typically just for the pay-per-views, does like Sniper, MMA, and Sun Tzu. Typically, they'll break down fights or whatever. So I listen to a lot of that, and obviously, the Stochastic will have an article or something, and obviously, I do the premium podcast for Roto Grinders, so like I know what Liam and Mike is going to say.
Yeah.
So to me, there's really not that much DFS content.
Yeah, it's not a crazy amount of content out
right,
there.
But then you look at the ownership projections and go, how does this make any sense? Dude, I'll talk bad about Roto Grinders since instead of calling out other sites. Like sometimes I look at Moneyball's projected ownership, and even on the show, me and Michael go, yeah, this person ain't going to be 20% owned. He's going to be 30% owned. I mean, you just know, right? But it's hard. This shows how hard it is to do ownership projections.
I mean, exactly. And it's, I think most sites are probably hesitant to put their thumb on the scales. Like they probably, I would assume, I don't know this, but I would assume that the Stochastic ownership projections are largely automated. There's not somebody going in and being like, well, I think based on box score chasers and the narratives out there, he's going to be higher. I think it's largely automated. So then I feel it's my job as somebody doing content and looking at those ownership to add that in to say, I said this on, a recent show. I said, Christian Watson, we've got him at basically the same ownership as Alan Lazard on a showdown slate a couple weeks ago or last week. And I was like, I don't really think that's going to be the case. I think Christian Watson is going to get higher ownership because he's, the sexy rookie who's getting 2 touchdowns a game. Everybody's been seeing that. And then, of course, Christian Watson came in. I was proud of that one. He came in like 12%, 13% higher. Well,
why aren't these adjustments being made then? Why do you expect?
I don't know.
Like, I'm not even talking about just Stochastic. I'm talking about in general of like.
Well, because you don't want to be wrong. Like you don't want to lead people astray based on your assumption of what narratives are going to be. And I'll say this: I this past show I said the same thing about Jelani Woods. I was like, we've got Jelani Woods projected for 11% ownership. I don't see there's any way he's going to be that low owned after he crushed on the last Island slate, and then he came in under 10% owned. So maybe I think there's something to allowing for the ownership projections to just be automated, and then maybe let content creators be the ones to say, maybe I think that this is going to be a little bit off based on narratives out there.
Yeah, but sometimes, but for the MMA, it's not what narratives. Like there's only so many. There's only so many fighters. You take a look and you go, how does a plus 240 inside the distance $7,200 heavyweight with name value is only going to be 13% owned? When literally everyone is talking about Pavlovich only beating like Maurice Green and like, he hasn't gone out of the first round. Like one, yeah, and then Pavlovich showed him, right?
Right.
I take a look and the least that we can do as content creators, that you do and as well as I do, is these are the baseline ownership projections, and in our content at least say, I don't agree. Like I'm perfectly fine saying I don't agree with this. I think this will be higher and that'll be lower, and you can feel free to adjust it as it is. But from maybe this is maybe our ownership projections are what the rational ownership should be.
Right.
But human beings are not rational. This is how I think human beings are going to react to this.
Yep.
But the question is, how come? And I'm posing this almost as a rhetorical question, not like is there a solution?
Right.
But why don't sites are more inclined to put their finger on the scale? Because I think the site that does it the most is ETR for football. And let me tell you, a lot of the times they're right. And a lot of the times they're wrong. Right? So like,
because it's hard to do. I think that's the answer, is that it's like, well, we assume that people are going to be reacting to this news, and as you say, a lot of the times we're right, and at least for me, a lot of the times I'm wrong too in my assumptions about like, I think this guy's going to get more steam based on narratives and revenge and a lot of different narratives out there, and sometimes that just doesn't happen.
Also, you have to think inside or outside of your own bubbles.
Yep.
Because it's like inside of our bubble, like this guy should be God knows how much owned, right? And then outside of the bubble, maybe that means nothing. Like that's why like the Nick Chubb stuff.
Samaje Perine is a good example there of, we thought, well, Samaje Perine should be getting a ton of steam, and then he just didn't.
Right. I mean, he got steam, but he didn't get to the extent that we would have thought. But a guy like Nick Chubb, it's like, I knew he was going to. Yeah, projections don't have him as high as, that he should be 25% owned. But in our bubble, no one's, dude, in our bubble, if I told you Nick Chubb was 25% owned on any slated 8K, you'd be like, X out.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But that's our bubble.
Yeah.
For the Millie Maker, dude, most of it is outside of our bubble. Oh, yeah. It's the Browns running back against the Texans run defense. Plug them in.
Yeah, jam them.
So you have to incorporate that somehow into your ownership projections, and I just point out the MMA stuff because, like, if I just relied on one site's ownership projections, boy, would my lineups be way different.
Yeah.
Because that's what I do after every slate. I didn't fill it in this time. I mean, I probably will later today. Is I compare what my MMA rating to the actual, and go who would I have played less of, more of? What would have my lineups been different had I known the actual ownership? And I judge my play based on, if I now take the actuals and put them in and then run my lineups, and I go, what's the total? Like, anything would have changed. And if my lineups still would have been my lineups pretty much, and I go, okay, it is that's
I played this great.
I played this great, right?
Yep.
So like when I'm playing Matthias Nicolau in 2 or 3 lineups out of my 8, going he's significantly underowned for his inside the distance odds, and then he comes in at 12-14%. I'm like, sure, but if I went by one of these sites that had him at 25% owned, he would have been in 0 lineups.
Yeah.
And then had I saw that he was 12%, I go, oh, I would have played like people, Uruguay. If you thought she was going to be 22% owned and X'd her out, and then she puts up 129 points in the first fight, you'd be like, why is she 12% owned? It's like, well, because that's what she should have. I mean, like,
Yeah.
right? Had you known she was 12% owned, you would have played her in at least one of 8 lineups. Yeah. Okay, so you need to make sure that number's right. You need to make sure that number is somewhat reasonably right.
Yeah.
And I think just relying on one, from my experience and looking for the past 2+ years, no, I'm just going to call out all of them. No site has, I would consider to be satisfactory enough ownership.
For MMA specifically.
For MMA specific, none of them. Now, there are some that are slightly better, that are better than others.
Yeah.
I admit. But the aggregate is by far, because it just curtails all of the outliers.
Do you think that there's any chance that also, I mean, we've talked about this with MLB, I mean, are the sites publishing ownership projections, does that affect then the ownership that actually comes out?
From what no.
Okay.
No, at very limited. You rarely. I don't think it. I think people that play MMA don't play that way.
Okay.
I think that there's two ends of the spectrum on MMA DFS players. You have the 150 maxer types that are just like, need to find the optimal, avoid dupes. But other than that, the ownership matters for calculating dupes, but that's it. There's not necessarily an exploitative strategy being employed. And then you have the opposite side of the spectrum of people that are just like, I just need to pick the 6 winning highest score fighters. And just like, oh, Mateus Nicolau has no upside, or Uruguay has no... They don't think in terms of 12% of the time she will get 120. They don't think like that.
Yeah,
they think way too binary. And they go, who do I X out and who do I play a lot of? Right? Or what fights do I target? They go, I'm playing 6 lineups. I need to have Pavlovich or Tuivasa fight in every one of my lines. I need to have the Natan Levy, Gennaro Valdez fight in every single, like, either side. Yep. And then the Ducati Hill fight X out. The Clay Guida... the Clay Guida Holtzman fight exit, like they do stuff like that. Where what does it matter what the ownership is on Scott Holtzman and Clay Guida if you're just not playing the fight at all? Okay, I don't care if Guida is 40% or 4%. I'm not playing the fight because I don't think the guy's going to score 100 points. Like that.
Yep.
End of the story, right? So to them, the ownership, who gives a? I mean, it doesn't matter to them, right? So you have two ends of the spectrum where the ownership projections don't matter as far as a strategic standpoint, right? Yeah. The strategic standpoint on the one side is, I don't care about ownership because I just want to pick winners, right?
Yeah.
Which is a horrible way of thinking about playing DFS. And then on the other end, it's the 150 large field type of people where it's like, I'm playing everyone. I'm just trying to play combinations that are less duped. So outside of calculating dupes, leverage as a strategy in MMA doesn't matter to them.
I don't know if I entirely, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but ownership still plays a big role for me in avoiding dupes. Like it's a big part of like,
no, right.
And I still do play exploitatively. Like if I see a fighter is projected for 10% ownership and we have them getting over 100 points 22% of the time, then I'm going to play exploitatively.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by that's exploitative. Most 150 maxers do not play exploitatively.
Okay.
If you take a look at most exposures, they're not going above. They're trying to make as many lineups that are as unique as possible with the highest upside fighters, regardless of ownership. Mm-hmm. The ownership is only there to calculate dupes. So, like, if you took a look like this past slate, and you go, Estela Nunes, maybe is in like 4% of some people's lineups. And you go, well, she was like 8%. Like, does that mean, they thought that she was overowned? It's like, no, like Estela Nunes is probably one of the lowest ceilings on the entire slate. The only reason they're playing Nunes in lineups is because Nunes fits in lineups with other higher owned fighters in it. But they're not playing much of Nunes only because her ceiling is low. But you see Tuivasa. Tuivasa was 32% owned, yet a lot of sharp players had a lot of Tuivasa at 7,200. And you go like, well, why did they play an overowned Tuivasa. It's like, well, because he had the most likely shot out of any underdog to get 100+ points. So as long as they played Tuivasa in lineups that weren't heavily duplicated, why wouldn't they want to play as much of a guy that's more likely to get 100+ points, even though their shot at getting 100+ is actually less likely than their ownership?
Right.
You're looking for the optimal. You're like, you don't care about playing you're not playing exploitatively. You just, as long as it's less than 5 dupes, I don't care if I play 72 Tuivasa lineups out of 100. That's what I mean by the ownership not mattering outside of just calculating dupes. Yet me and you, who play more exploitatively, is like, I'm using my rating based on who's over and under owned,
Right.
and who could give me the most relative value. So I take a look at a guy like Tuivasa and go, oh, he's a bit over owned, right? I take a look at some of these other guys, Mark Giacchese, right, coming in at 24 to 25%. I go over owned for his ceiling, and not play them. And in my 8 lineups, didn't play any of them, right? Just over owned. But if you told me Giacchese was 8% owned, he would have been in half my lineups.
Yeah.
The only reason for the max enterers to do that is just to avoid duplication. A lot of times you'll see a very balanced approach. You won't even see you'll typically see them be over on a lot of the underdogs, because a lot of them are playing lineups that leave 1,000 on the table, leave 1,200, leave 1,500 on the table. So they're typically over on, but it's not like, they're over on a lot of 1 or 2 underdogs. No, they're just over on all of the underdogs.
Right, just across the board,
right.
A little bit over. Yep.
And it's like the guy that's 40% owned, that it's like, wow, they're a little over owned. Like they'll have 38% of them. I mean,
right.
But then you take a look at their individual lineups, and out of the 150 set, like 118 are under 5s.
Right.
Right. And so it's like, exposure wise, they're kind of very balanced out, but they're all in the right types of lineups that have under 5 dupes for large field, and that's all that meant. Like, exploitatively, above and below the field doesn't really come into any type of exploitative type of play. Well, I don't play that way. I mean, I play if I believe, and you could see this in my exposures when I did play large field before late swap. I'll play 100 lineups, and there were some slates where a guy was 38% owned and I had 6% of him. A guy was 12% owned and I have 36% of him, because it's like, these are the people that are the most under-owned. I want way more of them. They provide me more value. The guys that are heavily over-owned, I'm just like, maybe they barely appear in lineups, and if they put up 130 points, then I just close laptop, and so be it.
But you think most 150 maxers do not play this way, the exploitative way that you and I both play? You think most are just looking at, I'm trying to avoid dupes, I'm going to run it through the dupe calculator, and
that's absolutely yes. I don't think as many people play MMA exploitatively, that in comparison to other sports.
Yeah.
In general, I mean, also in other sports, it's very similar. Also, you talk to a lot of sharper 150 maxers, and some of them literally say, it's like, I don't really care about ownership at all.
That's been the biggest surprise to me in doing the high stakes interviews, is so many of the pros are like, yep, don't worry, I don't worry about ownership at all, and they have a lot of success playing that way. I don't understand it, how that could work, but and I know, like, guys like Travis Petty is a good example of, well, he doesn't have to because he does his own projections and they're pretty different from everybody else. So in that case, don't have to worry so much about ownership. But in general, it surprises me how well some people do without really factoring it in that much.
No, but the thing is that their lineups do.
That's true. Yeah. So they don't intentionally factor ownership, but they
right. It's you take a look at, especially like some of the small field high stakes players, and you go, well, I don't factor in ownership at all. It's like, yeah, but you play 3 players in your lineup that were 8% or less owned. It's like, yeah, I thought they were, they know they need to get different in some way, but they're not obsessed over, well, what's my cumulative ownership? What's my product ownership? Just like, okay, I want to play a high projected lineup that is slightly different.
Right.
And then they choose some slightly different way, and they may not even look at ownership projections and go, well, I know this guy's going to be high on this guy. Like, And then they put together a lineup, and it's like, well, what's the ownership sum? I don't know what the ownership sum is, but I know that, like, I'm just going to stack this and do this and play this guy instead. And you go, well, oh, yeah, I don't care about ownership. It's like, no, you do without realizing that you do.
Yeah. You just don't put it under a microscope. It is part of your process. It's just not, you're not looking at it mathematically. You're just more using your intuition.
Either that or just you're getting to the same point as I am, just with a different method, just like with Travis, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't care about ownership. It's like, yeah, because a lot of times the guy that is 4% owned, you have projected for like 8 more points than anyone else in the industry.
Yeah.
So you know that he knows that his ownership leverage is already being taken care of. It's not like it's not that it's not important to him. He just knows that process of finding underowned players is already being incorporated into his how he'd play the 4% owned player going, based on my projections, he should be 36% owned. And now he's 4% owned. I'm glad I have him in 80% of my lineups. I mean, it ends up being exploitative play.
Right.
Without intentionally being exploitative play. So that's how I view when people say, I don't use ownership at all. It's like, well, you're still building lineups that are properly leveraged for the size of the field. So you're getting to the point of building this similar lineups that I'd be building anyway. So obviously, even though you're not factoring it in, it's coming out that way.
Right. I mean, yeah, they're obviously making good lineups or they wouldn't be successful DFS players.
Well, not necessarily. People get lucky.
Well, yeah, that's true. People get lucky sometimes, but not at the frequency of, the best in the world.
Yeah, but if you have 150 entries, you can't lose.
Well, that's true. I mean, if you can cover every combo, like how do you lose?
Right. I mean, on a 12-game NFL slate, 150 lineups should be able to cover every combo.
You can play every quarterback with all their best receivers, all the receivers that you'd want to play. Yeah.
All the Chiefs receivers, you could play all the Chiefs receivers lineups.
And that's what I do every week.
Right. And you can play all the defenses. So you can make sure that you can cover all the 24 defenses on the slate. You can make sure that you have at least, 5 lineups with the Browns in it. And then out of those 5 lineups with the Browns in it, you're covering all the combos of the 24 stacks on the slate. And somehow that equals 150 lineups. I don't know.
This is how DFS works. You just got to jam every combo. Yeah.
Right. And then if you run out of lineups, then that's when you get your wife to create an account.
Yeah.
Right. Now you can have another 150 lineups and 300. I mean, now with 300 lineups, I mean, you're almost getting to the point where you may have to even duplicate yourself because you're running out of combos.
Yeah, and just try to double up on those winnings when with the one that's going to hit.
Right. And if you had a 450 lineups, I mean, you'd be unstoppable.
Yeah. That's why it's
running
a
12-game NFL slate, right?
Yeah.
450, right? Of course, they can cover every combo.
Yeah.
Every possible combo. Of course. I still don't understand how people can say that with a straight face without even like you don't even need a formula to know how many more combinations of lineups there could possibly be than 150.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think people are really bad at math. I think is what it comes down to. People,
but I mean that's not even close. I mean, I could see being like if someone told me, it's like, okay, tell me how many if you took out all of the players that are projected less than 8 points. Mm-hmm. So even all of those players, just everything under 8 points. And you go, how many combinations? And you have to stack, you have to double stack, and you have to bring it back, right? We'll even put that in.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, there's a 12-game NFL slate. How many combinations do you think there possibly are? If someone would have told me and said, I don't know, 10,000, 50,000, like at least that, like it's not 100, like it's nowhere near 150. Yeah. And saying 50,000. You're off by a ridiculous amount as it is.
Yeah.
Like, because the right answer is like,
I have no idea what the right
answer is. $1 billion? I mean, like,
yeah.
Right. It's not even in the tens of, like, dude, it's way, way higher than that. But then yet you'll still have people that are like 150 lineups. You can cover all the combos. Like, I just.
Yeah. I can almost understand people thinking that for Showdown, just because it's like there's so few players in the player pool. Like, oh, you just get rid of these bad plays and you can cover every combo. Like, it makes more sense if you think that way for showdown. But it's still
But
not
even
even close to true.
I mean,
it's still way off. It's just
right,
a
he's
little bit
still
more understandable.
absurdly off, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think most showdowns, like the amount of combinations you can make, is probably 30 to 50,000 or something in that range, depending on how many players are active or whatever. I can't believe it's still a thing. We're coming on to 2023, and the same narratives, the same excuses.
People responding to screenshots. I haven't. I guess I have seen it relatively recently. Yeah, it's still a thing. Yeah,
right. That's why I liked your joke to my screenshot. It's like, what would you say? It's
anybody
like now
with 3 lineups,
right? With 2 lineups, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's easy, right? It's oh great, it's easy to win with 2 lineups.
Yeah. I can't remember. I feel like somebody might have responded earnestly to that. Like,
oh yeah, no, I think someone responded earnestly. Right? No, like no.
Someone said all the pros do it or something like that. I was like, oh, interesting.
No, Neil's obviously joking, yeah. Right? This MMA, so I got more tickets. I got so many tickets.
Nice.
Right. So I got 4 555 tickets for this coming UFC card. Yeah, I just went. Dude, these NFL slates that like these overlay all the time for the MMA and the soccer stuff. The soccer stuff is done, but the MMA stuff, like it overlays all the time. It'll be like a $40-something whatever. It'll be some like 17-man or 13-man or something, and like it'll be like a half an hour before lock. It's like 4 out of 13.
Wow.
I'm like, okay.
And that doesn't fill up. I mean, I guess if I saw it half an hour before lock and it was 4 out of 13, I'd probably say, well, that's probably going to fill, because obviously it's closer to lock time. It's more likely to get more users, but those are, how far off are they from filling?
They're half full.
Interesting. Okay.
7, 8, the soccer ones, I was doing the $90 7-man soccer ones, and there was one that was literally a head-to-head. It was me and McLovin in a head-to-head.
Out of how many?
It was supposed to be 7.
Oh,
it was 7. Just me and him, and that's it. 2 out of 7.
And they run the contest in that. It's not like a.
It's not a must fill. No.
Wow. Okay.
They'll post like 2 of them for the Soccer World Cup thing. They posted like every NFL main slate. They posted like 2 of these. And they would, I would enter them, and it would always be like 4 out of 7, 5 out of 7, 3 out of 7.
Wow.
Right. And I'm just like, why not? I'm playing these contests. So like I wouldn't do it. The thing is I wouldn't do it for tennis or anything. Like it's something that I'm actually going to play. Like, so the MMA stuff is the same thing. Oh, it's a satellite into the $500 MMA qualifier. And it's a $70 9-man or something like that. And I'm like, it's like, okay, it's 3 out of 9. Okay, 4 out of 9 now, and it fills with 5, and it's like, okay,
yeah,
it's fine. I mean, FanDuel, you could do it all the time.
Yeah. Honestly, it's probably the best way to make money in DFS. Is just chasing overlay like this.
Well, isn't that always the easiest way?
Yeah, that is always the easiest way. But I do not do it. I do not take advantage of the overlay like I should. That's probably a leak. The old Kyle Dvorak approach of just chasing all the overlay and turn it into money. Yeah.
Right, but he was chasing overlay in sports that he had no idea. He was just using stochastic projections, which is fine.
Right.
Right.
I mean, if there is overlay, why not just play a high projected lineup? Then
Depending. I mean, personally, I just do it for the ones where like it's contests and slates that I would play anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not entering college football satellites. I mean, even for the NBA stuff. Like, dude, I ain't playing NBA until January.
I haven't been playing much NBA at all recently. I went to the Timberwolves game on Saturday, and I played. I entered 4 lineups just like on the drive over. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll hand build a few. So I entered one lineup 4 times and then completely forgot about it. And then it had Rudy Gobert in it. Came close to cashing, but Rudy Gobert got ejected in the second quarter. So yeah, I've been basically not playing NBA much this season at all. And I think I'm the same way. It's probably going to be after NFL starts winding down. I'm going to get more involved in NBA again. Just right now, I feel a little bit burnt out.
Yeah. Well, especially with other stuff going on. Like
Yeah.
it's the type of thing. Like once NFL is into the playoffs and right, World Cup is
Right. Then
over. Right,
I'll start feeling a
MMA
little
will
bit
be off
bored.
for a month, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? Okay,
Yeah.
now I'll get into the cesspool that is NBA DFS.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. I still do love it sometimes when I play. I can get super into it, but it used to be just like my bread and butter was NBA. It was my favorite sport, and now it's gotten to the point where it's like I prefer playing NFL DFS. I think, and yeah, just haven't felt like playing recently.
I still think it's my most profitable sport.
I mean, I would think that it should. NFL is very clearly my most profitable sport, but I would
Right.
think that NBA should be based on late swap and stuff and how much edge there is. I do think that the field has gotten pretty damn sharp, though. Like a lot of the field now is late swapping appropriately, and it's getting tougher.
From an overall raw money, yeah, NBA's my most profitable sport. Not from an ROI perspective. It's my second in ROI.
After soccer,
No, MMA.
MMA. Okay,
Right.
that makes
My
sense.
ROI in MMA is 39%,
Nice.
which is nuts, which is
Yeah.
not sustainable. NBA
Right.
it's 27%, which pretty damn good.
Yeah,
Uh,
I take that. I'm single digits in NBA. I play pretty high volume, so it's a decent amount of money. But
Right.
yeah, single digits ROI.
Yeah, soccer I'm 12, NFL I'm 5, and MLB I'm 2.
MLB, yeah, I'm close to even at it. I was up so much. My ROI was looking so good coming into this year, and I just got slaughtered this season in MLB, and now it's down to I don't know. I'm probably borderline 0 ROI in MLB lifetime.
I'm just happy that I mean, although I always say that that the years don't matter, right? But my MMA win put me over the profit line on DraftKings, back over the profit line on DraftKings
For 2022.
for 2022.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from experience now, years do matter a lot for taxes.
Yes.
After having a great 2021 and a terrible 2022, I'm like, if I could just combine these for tax purposes, I'd be doing great. But since I can't combine them, I'm like, hasn't been that great of a 2 years once you factor in taxes.
Right. Well, that's what I was hoping for. Like, it's like, okay, I need to get above the line on DraftKings, and then FanDuel I'm fine because I have the NBA win over there. So like that, I'm going to get that. So now I'm over the line on DraftKings, so I don't have to worry about, not worry, just that it makes it, I can't take the losses from the previous, and carry it over or anything like that. So, and it's also going to be nice to say and show a Roto Tracker screen that shows that 8 straight tax years of getting a 1099.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
I
always
can't say that. I think I had 4. I'm likely not going to have one this year. It's going to be my first losing year in a while.
But that's normal.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's also happens. You shift the month over.
Yeah, exactly.
And it I mean
everything.
that's what I mean by like my slant win 2 years ago. If you move that to like 1 month previous like that, then next thing you know, that year is a losing year, but the next year is a 50,000 higher year. So it's like I always view it as like a rolling average.
Yeah.
Of like, what am I making on average?
Except for the taxes. Except for the tax.
Except for the taxes.
In the States, it can be painful.
Right, but I've never been in, like, this is the first time I was ever in a position this late in the year where I was down on a site.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably a good thing to have.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing to have, yeah.
Right. Because it's worse. It's worse to go down early and then have to make that up than to go up early.
To win early and then lose it throughout the year?
Yeah.
Why
from
do you think that
matters? From a tax perspective, it's like on FanDuel, like right now, like I updated this 2 weeks ago. Like I have a profit of about 45,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I played on FanDuel and lost another 10K, it's just like well, 27% or whatever the hell would have gone out in taxes anyway, right?
Right.
So now, so like 20, that's like almost free money if you want to call it like something like that. But it's like, had I lost that on DraftKings when I was down 10K, like I'm not getting a tax break on that
Yeah,
because I'm just
exactly.
not getting any 1099 anyway. So like
But then the
now that I'm
opposite is true
over the
too.
line on DraftKings, if I lose money, like I'm getting like a 25 to 30% quote
Yeah,
discount.
but the opposite is true also. If you win, if you're down 50,000 on DraftKings and you win 50,000, that's entirely tax free. The winnings.
Right.
So it goes both ways.
Right. It does go both ways. Right. But it's worse to be down because you can't take that off of their winnings from another site.
Right. True.
Right. So that's the main thing. It's like balancing
The sites.
right, balancing it out so that
Yeah.
I mean you can't control when you like win first place in anything.
No.
But it's like I knew on FanDuel once I won the NBA, since I don't play as much volume on FanDuel, it's like, okay, FanDuel's already taken care of. Now it's a matter of getting my DraftKings over the line. So I'm fine. I'm fine there. And if it was a small loss, it's a small loss. But it always sucks. It's like minus 10,000. I'm not going to get a 1099 that says minus 10,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So it's like, okay, whatever, minus 10,000, like basically like $3,000 of that I've already paid in taxes. Right, because I can't take it off of the other site or Underdog or Prize Picks or
Right.
everything else that I'm a part of.
Yeah.
So this is why you're not losing at DFS in December. You're just tax loss harvesting.
That's right.
Anything else?
No, I mean, it's been a couple weeks. I'm trying to think if we've missed any big DFS drama or anything. I don't think that we have. I think it's been a pretty lackluster, uneventful couple weeks.
Still need an episode title for this.
Oh, no. Tax loss harvesting.
No, I think I've already done that also.
Oh, I think
what about the ownership projections? The R squareds? The squared? The R's?
Squares are using R squared.
How about Arse
squared?
Arse squared.
Arse squared.
Because we were making fun. We were making fun of the R squared, so it's like Arse. Because they like we're in the UK.
Like
it can't British, be Arse squared. Arse.
I like it. That'll work.
That'll work. There's no reason that remember I don't optimize for anything for search engines, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. As long as it's creative. Right. Arse squared.
All right. Good enough, I'd say.
Okay. That's the last thing. Right. What else are we going to talk about in 2 weeks from now?
By then, one of us will have shipped a milli, I'm sure. We'll talk about that.
Most likely be you.
I hope so.
I don't know. How many liners do I play in a milli? Nothing. I mean.
Yeah. Maybe best ball. I know you don't care about best ball, but I am very much getting to like that. That's kind of where I'm focusing at this point because I have so many lineups.
You have nothing to do with focusing. There's nothing. You can't do anything.
Focusing my attention, not any kind of work on it. Yeah. So I'm excited about best ball.
Are we going to do a New Year's resolutions episode?
Oh, we can do it. That's a good idea.
Oh, it is. I was really joking. Is that a good idea?
It is a good idea. Think about what are we going to do differently, and I don't know. Is it a good idea? We can think about it.
Right. I don't know what my New Year's resolution is going to be. I'd probably have to look at Roto Tracker and say whatever I was negative in, don't play anymore.
Yeah, that's what I did this year. So I mean, I didn't. It wasn't a New Year's resolution, but coming into this year, I was like, I'm winning so much if I just play contests that are like $25 or lower in entry fee, and losing so much if I play higher stake stuff. So coming in, I've been focusing on I'm just going to play the ones I'm good at, and then of course now I'm losing at those too. So has not worked so far. But it's a good idea. It's a good exercise to look at what you're winning at, what you're losing at, and maybe
But also the difference is you have to look at it also objectively, and some of it is variance also.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think lifetime I've had pretty good luck. I've had probably more luck than I should have in large field stuff, and I've probably had less luck than I should have in some smaller field, higher dollar entry fee contests. So definitely that plays a role in it.
So if you want to come up with your own New Year's resolutions, you could tweet at me at BlenderHD or at Neil Player Q DFS. You had Ben Raza on the High Stakes podcast. I have not listened to that episode yet.
It's a short one, nice and short, but it was fun talking to Ben. I always enjoy Ben's content, and we talked a little bit of sports betting, that kind of stuff.
Who do you have on next?
Don't know yet.
Don't know. Okay, and if
it's not till next week, so
okay. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. All I know is that the last episode of High Stakes is going to be whenever Adam comes on.
That's right. He'll be
like, you're completely out when you're finally convinced. I'm assuming it'll be after NBA season.
I mean, currently there's no plan. Adam has said he doesn't want to come on the show. He has joked about, maybe I need to come on because Josh's episode has the most views overall. So he's like, well, maybe I need to come on just to eclipse Josh's total. But
wouldn't technically mine be?
Is it? I haven't looked recently, but probably with your
aggregate. If you aggregate them together.
Okay. Well, then I that counts.
Right.
Yeah.
You have the most views on this show.
Yeah. Do I even though? Like if you
aggregate them all,
still has. Like Eric still has more episodes than me. Probably a higher aggregation.
I don't know. He took off so many times that it's hard to tell.
Yeah. As of when you came on High Stakes, I had done the math, and Eric had still been on this show like maybe 7 or 10 times more than me. So maybe I've caught up to him in terms of probably I'm closing in at least on the most minutes on the show.
Right. But maybe not the most minutes talking.
Probably not the most minutes talking. That's true.
No, I lead that by a healthy margin.
Yeah.
Okay, so subscribe to the High Stakes podcast on iTunes or the Stochastic podcast feed, which if you subscribe to, you get like 700 new episodes every day of everything.
Yep.
Which is fine. You just weed for the stuff that you want, and you don't want. And obviously, rate and review this show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast, or on YouTube. I still don't understand why people watch this on YouTube instead of just listen to. It's just me and you talking heads. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see here, unless people put it on and then put it on the background mute.
I listen to everything on YouTube, so I do get it, and I just have it on in the background. And that's
if there's a RSS feed podcast version, why wouldn't I just play it in a podcast player?
I don't know. There's no reason not to.
There's absolutely no reason. I don't get it. Let me know. People always comment on YouTube and go, "Oh, okay, the sound sucks." Yeah, because I fixed the sound for the podcast.
Here's one thing I do. I subscribe to the YouTube Premium, so I don't have to deal with any kind of ads on YouTube. So if you're already subscribed to YouTube, then maybe you don't want to subscribe to, a podcast platform to also get rid of the ads.
Yeah, but this podcast has no ads.
I mean, this podcast, but like High Stakes, I get that complaint sometimes. Like, why do I get these ads when I listen to the High Stakes podcast? And I'm like, I have no idea. Those are just like your targeted ads.
Right.
So it's other people have ads. Whereas if I listen to High Stakes on YouTube, I don't get any kind of ads.
Okay. Now you've convinced me that can make some sense. For this podcast, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right. But for others,
right.
I could see. Okay. Yeah. Because YouTube Premium, you don't get the Okay. I get it now. You convinced me.
Nice.
You convinced me. And how can I convince everyone out there for Christmas to get their significant other or themselves the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports? It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com.